Welcome back to Klepper's Corner, Today in History. Today we look at March 29th, a date that proves humanity has always been simultaneously brilliant, chaotic, ambitious, and occasionally completely unhinged. From Viking invasions and medieval legal reforms to Cold War espionage and archaeological discoveries that changed how we understand civilization. This day reminds us that history is less like a straight line and more like a drunk guy trying to assemble IKEA furniture with no instructions. Let's dive into the moments when people made decisions so impactful that centuries later we're still dealing with the consequences, or at least making jokes about them. Segment 1. Barbarians with law degrees and Vikings with boats. The early medieval period often gets described as the Dark Ages, mostly because nobody had invented decent lighting yet. But March 29th shows us that even chaos needs paperwork. In 502 AD, King Gundobad issued the Lex Burgundionum, essentially telling Germanic warriors and Roman citizens that instead of settling disputes with axes, maybe try a fine system first. Nothing says civilization like converting revenge into invoices. This law introduced the idea of weregild, meaning you could literally assign a price to a human life, which sounds horrifying until you remember modern insurance companies basically do the same thing, but with more spreadsheets. Meanwhile, in 845 AD, Vikings, led by Ragnar Lodbrok, attacked Paris with 120 ships, reminding Europe that while one group was inventing legal systems, another group was inventing the concept of surprise longboat parking. King Charles the Bald paid the invaders thousands of pounds of silver to leave, essentially pioneering the first recorded subscription service. Pay monthly or the Vikings show up again. It turns out raid now, bill later was extremely persuasive diplomacy. Segment 2. Holy Knights, Falling Cities, and the Subscription Model of Power. In 1139, Pope Innocent II officially endorsed the Knights Templar, transforming a small group of pious knights into what can best be described as medieval PayPal with swords. The Templars gained financial privileges, so extensive they basically became the original multinational corporation, except their quarterly earnings report involved crusades. Fast forward to 1430, when the Ottoman Empire captured Thessalonica, a city so historically important that losing it was like accidentally deleting your operating system. The Byzantines had already sold the city to Venice for protection, which is like selling your house to a security company and then still getting robbed. This moment tightened Ottoman control in the region and paved the way for the eventual fall of Constantinople. History repeatedly teaches us that outsourcing defense rarely works when the other side has cannons and motivation. Segment 3. England's snowstorm slaughter and sugar empires. The Battle of Towton in 1461 remains the bloodiest battle ever fought on English soil, proving once again that nothing says family dispute like tens of thousands of armored men fighting in a snowstorm because someone disagreed about inheritance rights. Imagine the weather forecast that morning. 100% chance of arrows with gusts of betrayal. Roughly 1/10 of England's fighting-age men showed up, which means medieval HR departments must have been extremely confused the following Monday. Meanwhile, in 1549, the Portuguese founded Salvador in Brazil, establishing a colonial capital that would become central to the sugar trade and, tragically, to the transatlantic slave trade. Nothing highlights the contradictions of empire like building cathedrals on hills overlooking harbors full of human suffering. Empires loved calling exploitation commerce, which is branding so effective it still shows up in modern corporate mission statements. Segment 4. Nature turns off Niagara and Britain goes shopping. In 1848, Niagara Falls temporarily stopped flowing due to an ice jam, creating a moment when one of nature's loudest landmarks suddenly went silent. Residents believed the apocalypse had arrived, which is understandable because if Niagara Falls suddenly stops, you assume either divine intervention or a very ambitious beaver union. People walked across the dry riverbed, discovering relics and lost weapons, proving that if humans see exposed ground, we immediately assume buried treasure is involved. 1 year later, in 1849, the British annexed Punjab and seized the Koh-i-Noor diamond, demonstrating once again that empire building often involved the sentence, and we'll be taking that shiny thing as well. Around the same era, the United States drafted the Alaska Purchase in 1867, paying $7.2 million for territory critics called Seward's Folly. Turns out buying 586,000 square miles for the price of a modern parking garage was actually a solid investment strategy. Segment 5. Heroic failure, atomic secrets, and cult leaders. In 1912, Antarctic explorer Robert Falcon Scott wrote his final diary entry while trapped in a blizzard just miles from safety. His expedition became the ultimate example of heroic determination mixed with catastrophic planning, like deciding to bring geological samples while starving in sub-zero temperatures. Nothing says dedication to science like dragging rocks while freezing to death. In 1951, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg were convicted of espionage for passing nuclear secrets to the Soviet Union, intensifying Cold War paranoia and proving that the most dangerous office gossip involves atomic blueprints. By 1971, Charles Manson was sentenced to death for orchestrating murders that shattered the illusion that the 1960s counterculture was all peace and love. It turns out free love was not supposed to include apocalyptic cult leadership. Segment 6. War crimes, war endings, and warriors made of clay. Also in 1971, Lieutenant William Calley Jr. was convicted for his role in the My Lai massacre, forcing Americans to confront the moral cost of the Vietnam War and the reality that war crimes don't come with patriotic background music. 2 years later, in 1973, the last U.S. combat troops left Vietnam, ending direct American involvement, but leaving behind political scars that still influence foreign policy debates today. And in 1974, farmers in China discovered the Terracotta Army while digging a well, proving once again that the greatest archaeological discoveries often begin with someone saying, "That's weird. Why is there a giant clay soldier in my backyard?" Thousands of life-size warriors had stood silently underground for over 2,000 years, waiting patiently for humans to rediscover them and immediately turn them into a museum gift shop opportunity. In conclusion, March 29th demonstrates that history is built by conquerors, reformers, explorers, opportunists, and occasionally farmers with shovels who accidentally uncover civilizations. Laws replaced vengeance. Empires rose through trade and violence. Wars redefined nations. And humanity continued its long tradition of making enormous decisions with incomplete information and absolute confidence. If there's one lesson from today, it's that history is less about perfection and more about persistence. And apparently, sometimes about charging admission to look at clay soldiers.